At 78, I've learned a lot. But one decision I deeply regret is letting my children manage all my finances. It seemed like the right choice then, but it changed everything. I'll share 4 hard truths I wish someone had told me before I gave away my control. I remember it clearly. David and Sarah, my children, were at my kitchen table. "Mom," David began, "we're just worried about you handling all these bills." Sarah added, "Let us take care of it. Make sure you're secure, no worries." Their words were so reassuring, full of love, and I felt a warmth, mixed with a tiny, unvoiced apprehension. I deliberated for days. I trusted David and Sarah, but a part of me, the independent woman, recoiled. They were so insistent, so practical. I rationalized it as temporary, for convenience, a way to simplify things. With a deep breath, I signed the papers, handing over my bank statements, my investment portfolios, a lifetime of financial decisions. It felt like a weight lifted, yet something precious had been surrendered. A quiet capitulation. For the first few months, a calm settled. Bills were paid, no more worrying about statements, more time for my garden and painting. It felt genuinely easier, a burden truly lifted. I'd sit sipping tea, convinced I'd made the right choice. This peace, though, was deceptive, a false calm before the real storm began. It wasn't a sudden storm that swept away my financial freedom. It was more like a slow, creeping tide. The first changes were so subtle, so easily explained away, that I barely noticed them at first. One morning I went to check the mail, a small ritual I'd always enjoyed, only to find the usual stack of bank statements and investment reports missing. I thought it was an oversight, a postal error. But when I asked David, he casually mentioned he'd redirected all financial correspondence to his address. "Just makes it easier for us to manage, Mom," he'd said. Then, a few weeks later, a charity I'd supported for years sent a generic "thank you" note, not for my usual monthly donation, but for a smaller, one-off gift. My stomach clenched. They'd changed my giving, too, without a word. A pang of unease, a whisper of a question, started in my mind. Was easier, truly, better for me? The real jolt came a month or two later. I'd been dreaming of a small, comfortable armchair for my reading nook, a cozy spot where I could lose myself in a book. It wasn't extravagant, just a modest piece to make my home feel more dimine. I called David, excited to tell him. "David, darling, I found the perfect little chair!" "Could you help me arrange the payment from my account?" There was a slight pause. Then, gently, but with a firmness I hadn't heard before, he said, "Mom, I don't think that's really in the budget right now. We need to be careful with your funds." My heart sank. Not in the budget? My money, my home, my comfort. I couldn't believe it. The bluntness of his "no" echoed in the quiet room, leaving me utterly shocked and hurt. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay in bed, the sting of David's refusal burning deep. Me, Eleanor Vance, who had managed household budgets, saved for retirement, and put 2 children through college, was now being told I couldn't buy a modest armchair. It felt like I was being treated as a child, incapable of making my own choices. The humiliation was a cold, heavy blanket. I remembered sitting at my kitchen table, balancing checkbooks, feeling a quiet pride in my financial independence. Now, that feeling was replaced by a profound sense of powerlessness. A tear traced a path down my cheek in the dark. How had I fallen so far, so quickly? Not long after, David and Sarah called a budget meeting at my dining room table. They arrived with binders and spreadsheets, looking very serious. "Mom, we just want to make sure your money lasts," David began, pushing a detailed printout across the table. They went through line item by line item, highlighting what they considered unnecessary expenses. My subscription to the garden club, the small weekly allowance I gave myself for treats, even the occasional lunch out with Margaret, all were scrutinized. When I tried to defend the garden club, explaining how much joy it brought me, David sighed patiently. "We understand, Mom, but these little things add up. We're just being responsible stewards of your money." I felt my personal choices being judged, my needs dismissed, and my voice gently but firmly overruled. I just nodded, feeling small and unheard. After that meeting, I found myself walking on eggshells. But one afternoon, passing a small local art gallery, a vibrant watercolor caught my eye. It was a sun-drenched landscape, bursting with color, and it spoke to my soul. I bought it, a spontaneous act of defiance, a small reclaiming of joy. I hung it proudly in my living room, my heart lighter than it had been in weeks. When David visited, his eyes immediately went to it. "What's this, Mom?" he asked, his tone flat. "A painting," I replied, a little too brightly. He looked closer, then back at me. "Is this really a necessary expense with the budget we just discussed?" My brief joy evaporated, replaced by a familiar wave of guilt and frustration. Even my small pleasures, my personal tastes, were now subject to their cold financial approval. That's the first hard truth I learned. Losing control over my money felt like losing a part of myself. Asterisk. It wasn't just about the numbers in a bank account. It was about the power of choice, the freedom to define my own life. Before, my money was an extension of my independence, my ability to decide what brought me joy, what charity I supported, what comfort I allowed myself. Once I handed that over, those small decisions, those expressions of who I was, were no longer mine. They became expenses to be approved or denied by someone else. So, if you're considering letting your children manage all your finances, I urge you to ask yourself, are you truly ready to give up the power of choice, the very essence of who you are, for what seems like convenience? Because once you do, you'll find that financial independence isn't just about money, it's about holding onto your identity. After a while, the initial calm started to fray. It wasn't a sudden storm, but more like a persistent drizzle that slowly seeped into everything. I began to realize that one of the hardest truths about letting my children manage my finances was the slow erosion of information. I hadn't seen a bank statement in months. My investment reports, which I used to pore over with a cup of tea, simply stopped arriving. I checked my mailbox, hoping for a familiar envelope, but all I found were flyers and junk mail. A knot started to form in my stomach. What was happening with my money? Was everything truly fine, as David had assured me, or was I deliberately being kept in the dark? The feeling was unsettling, like walking in a room where the lights had suddenly gone out. My unease grew, and I knew I had to ask. So I called David. "David, I started trying to sound casual. I was just wondering if you've seen any of my bank statements lately, or the reports for my investments. I haven't received them." There was a slight pause on the other end. "Oh, Mom, don't worry your head about those," he said, his voice a little too breezy. "Everything's fine. Everything's being handled. We've just got them redirected to our place to keep things organized. Less clutter for you," I pressed gently. "But I'd like to see them, dear, just to keep track." He chuckled. "Mom, honestly, you wouldn't understand all the complexities anyway. Just trust us. We've got it all under control." The call ended, and I hung up the phone, my hand trembling slightly. His words were meant to be reassuring, but they only left me feeling patronized, dismissed, and more suspicious than ever. Sarah, bless her heart, noticed. During one of her visits, she found me staring out the window, looking distant. "Mom, is everything all right?" she asked, her voice soft with genuine concern. I hesitated, then finally let out a sigh. "It's just, I feel so out of the loop with my own money, Sarah. David says not to worry, but he never actually tells me anything. I don't know what's coming in, what's going out." Sarah listened, her brow furrowed. She didn't say much about David directly, but she squeezed my hand. "I understand, Mom," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "It must be frustrating. I'll talk to him." It was a small comfort, knowing one of my children saw my distress, even if she couldn't immediately solve the problem. The unspoken tension around my finances became a quiet guest at every family gathering. I remember one Sunday dinner at David's house, surrounded by the laughter of my grandchildren. I saw an opportunity. "David," I said, trying to keep my voice light, "I was thinking, perhaps we could sit down next week and just quickly go over the accounts. It's been a while, and I'd just like to understand a few things." The lively chatter around the table died down for a moment. David cleared his throat, avoiding my gaze. "Mom, can we not talk about finances at dinner? It's Sunday. Let's just enjoy the meal, shall we? You know we'll get to it when there's time." He quickly pivoted to asking one of the grandchildren about their school project, and the conversation surged around me once more. I sat there, a forced smile on my face, feeling utterly isolated and unheard, despite being surrounded by my own family. That evening, after Sarah and the others had left, David stayed behind for what he called a talk. My living room felt heavy with unspoken words. I gathered my courage. "David," I began, my voice firmer than I expected, "I need to understand what's happening with my money. I feel like I'm being deliberately kept in the dark, and it's not fair." He bristled, immediately defensive. "Mom, we are just doing what's best for you. We're protecting your assets. You don't understand the complexities of investments and taxes anymore. It's a lot for us to manage, and we're doing it out of love." He gestured dismissively. "You just need to trust us." His words stung, not just for their condescension, but for the implication that I was incapable, that my concerns were trivial. My trust, which had once been so freely given, now felt like a fragile thing, shattering into pieces. That was the second hard truth I learned, that entrusting your finances to your children can lead to a growing chasm of communication, leaving you isolated from your own life decisions. It wasn't that my children intentionally wanted to hurt me, but their help had slowly but surely built a wall of silence. I was no longer a participant in my financial future. I was merely a recipient of decisions made for me, about me, without me. I would lie awake, wondering if they truly understood my needs, my desires, or if they just saw numbers on a spreadsheet. When you give up control over your money, you often give up your voice too. So if you're thinking about letting your children take over your finances, ask yourself this: are you prepared to be left in the dark about your own future? Because once that silence sets in, it's incredibly difficult to break. After a checkup, my doctor suggested a new therapy, something simple but potentially very helpful for my arthritis. It wasn't essential, mind you, but it promised to ease my daily aches and keep me moving with less pain. I felt a flutter of hope, eager to try it. But when I mentioned the cost to David, his tone shifted. "Are you sure it's necessary, Mom? That sounds rather pricey. There are cheaper options, you know. We need to be sensible with your funds." The words hit me like a cold spray. My own health, my comfort, suddenly subject to a budget committee of one. It wasn't about the money. I knew I had it. It was about losing the right to choose what felt best for my body. I looked at the brochure later, the vibrant pictures of active seniors, and felt a wave of resignation wash over me. My choices weren't entirely my own anymore. It wasn't just my health, my home. The one place I always felt completely in charge started feeling neglected. The faucet in the kitchen began to drip, a persistent, annoying, nos plink 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 that grated on my nerves. I called David. He promised to look into it, but days turned into a week, then 2. "I'm getting quotes, Mom," he'd say. "Don't want to overpay." Meanwhile, the drip continued. The rose bushes I loved so much in the front garden started to get unruly, their branches sprawling. I mentioned needing a gardener, but again it was put off. "We can probably prune them ourselves when we visit," Sarah offered vaguely. My home, once my sanctuary, began to feel like a slow-motion decline, and I was powerless to stop it. I'd walk past the dripping faucet, or look out at the overgrown roses, and sigh. It was a constant, quiet reminder that I couldn't even authorize basic repairs in my own house. My social life, which had always been so vibrant, started to shrink too. I saw a flyer for a local senior group planning a day trip to a historical site, complete with lunch. It sounded wonderful, a chance to connect and explore. I called David, explaining the cost was modest. His response was immediate. "Mom, we just discussed the budget. Perhaps you could find something free to do? It's important to be frugal." Frugal. The word echoed in my empty living room as I watched daytime television. I stopped looking at flyers. I found myself declining invitations, too embarrassed to admit I couldn't access funds for a simple outing. The loneliness I discovered wasn't just about family visits. It was about losing the freedom to engage with the world on my own terms. My calendar, once dotted with social plans, became starkly blank. The sting of dependence deepened when my youngest grandchild, Lily, had her 10th birthday. I wanted to give her something special, a small telescope she'd been talking about for months. It wasn't extravagant, but it was meaningful. I mentioned it to Sarah, who usually handled the gift buying for me with David's funds. She looked uncomfortable. "Mom, David and I talked, and with your budget, we really think a nice book would be more appropriate this year." A book. I remembered the joy of choosing gifts freely, of seeing my grandchildren's faces light up. Now, even my generosity was curated. I held the small, pre-approved gift at Lily's party, a children's novel, and felt a profound sadness. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the joy of giving, the ability to express my love in a way that truly mattered to me, being taken away. I felt inadequate, a grandmother whose love was restricted by a budget she didn't control. As these incidents accumulated, a new, chilling fear began to settle over me. Lying awake at night, staring into the darkness of my room, my mind would race with what-if scenarios. What if I had a sudden, major medical emergency that wasn't covered by insurance? What if the roof suddenly started leaking after a storm, requiring an urgent, expensive repair? What if there was a sudden market downturn, affecting my investments? I had no immediate access to my own funds. Every potential crisis, every unexpected need, would require me to go through David. I was completely reliant on my children, not just for convenience, but for my very security. The thought of being truly helpless, unable to respond to a crisis in my own life, was terrifying. I'd toss and turn, the shadows on the ceiling seeming to dance with my dread. The sense of vulnerability was suffocating. This, I realized, was the third hard truth. The burden of unintended dependence. It wasn't just about losing my money, it was about losing my agency. Every aspect of my life, from my health choices to my home, my social engagements, even my ability to show love to my grandchildren, was now filtered through my children's financial decisions. They might have thought they were making my life easier, but in reality, they were slowly, subtly, stripping away my ability to direct my own life. True independence isn't just about having your bills paid. It's about having control over your choices, your dignity, your very sense of self. I'd look at old photographs of myself, younger, vibrant, making my own decisions without a second thought, and I barely recognized the person I had become. So I must ask you, are you prepared to live a life dictated by someone else's idea of your budget, where every choice, every comfort, every joy must be approved by another? Because once you give up that control, getting it back is a fight you never anticipated. I remember the day it truly hit me. It wasn't one grand insult, but 1,000 tiny cuts. It was after David had, once again, dismissed my simple request to replace my worn-out garden gloves, telling me to make do. Make do? With my own money. Something inside me snapped. I sat in my living room, the afternoon light fading, and a quiet fury began to burn. I couldn't live like this anymore, a prisoner in my own home, beholden to my children for every small comfort. This wasn't the ease I'd sought. It was a cage. I looked at my hands, once so capable, now feeling utterly useless. The fear of being helpless was replaced by a fierce, undeniable resolve. I wasn't done yet. I was Eleanor Vance, and I had fought battles before. This was one I had to win, not just for myself, but for the woman I used to be. The first step was difficult. Who do you turn to when your own children are the problem? I thought of Margaret, my friend of 50 years. She'd always had a clear head. We met at our favorite little cafe, and I poured out my heart. The missing statements, David's dismissive tone, the armchair, the garden gloves, the budget meetings where I felt like a child. Margaret listened, her hand gently covering mine. "Eleanor," she said softly, "this isn't right. You have rights." She told me about a local agency that specialized in elder financial advocacy, and even suggested I consider speaking with a lawyer. A lawyer! The idea felt drastic, but a glimmer of hope sparked within me. Just knowing there were options, that I wasn't entirely alone in this, was a profound relief. Armed with a newfound resolve, I called David and Sarah. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. They came, sitting across from me in my living room, the same room where they had once promised me peace of mind. I looked at them, my children, and took a deep breath. "I've decided to take back control of my finances," I stated, clearly and firmly. I explained, as calmly as I could, that while I appreciated their initial help, the arrangement was no longer working for me. I needed my independence back. David's face went from surprise to a tight, defensive mask. Sarah looked worried, her gaze flicking between her brother and me. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken accusations and a palpable shift in the air. Their reaction was immediate and intense. "Mother, are you sure about this?" David began, his voice laced with concern that felt more like accusation. "We're just trying to protect you. The markets are so complicated now. Do you really think you're capable of handling everything on your own?" Sarah, though quieter, echoed his sentiments with veiled suggestions about my age and memory. The guilt trips came next, subtle at first, then more direct. "After everything we've done for you, why are you doing this to us?" David asked over the phone, his voice dripping with hurt. "It feels like you don't trust us." Every conversation was a battle, emotionally draining, designed to make me doubt myself, to make me feel ungrateful. But I remembered Margaret's words, and the quiet rage that had ignited my resolve. I was weary, yes, but I held firm. I knew I couldn't do this alone. Following Margaret's advice, I made an appointment with an elder law attorney. Sitting in their quiet office, I felt a different kind of tension, a productive one. The lawyer, a kind woman named Ms. Davies, listened patiently to my entire story. She explained the process of revoking David's power of attorney, setting up new bank accounts in my name, and getting access to my investment details. It wasn't as simple as I'd hoped. There was paperwork, official notifications, and waiting periods, but it was a clear path forward. She confirmed my rights, outlining each step, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a deep sense of empowerment. The bureaucracy was intimidating, but the knowledge that I was legally protected gave me strength. Holding that first bank statement, addressed to me in my own name, felt like holding a victory trophy. It was a simple piece of paper, but it represented a hard-won battle, a reclamation of self. The journey had been long, arduous, and emotionally costly. It strained my relationship with my children, especially David, in ways I hadn't anticipated. The tears I shed weren't just from sadness, but from the immense effort it took to untangle myself from a situation I had willingly entered. Nobody tells you this part. Nobody warns you that once you hand over that control, getting it back is a fight, a true test of will and resilience. It's not just about paperwork. It's about fighting for your dignity, your identity, your very right to choose. If you're considering letting your children manage your finances, ask yourself, are you prepared for the fight to get your life back once you've given it away? Because once you settle into that dependent role, the barriers to leaving it, whether emotional, practical, or even legal, can be harder to overcome than you ever expect. Looking back now at 78, I don't regret growing older. That's a natural part of life, a privilege denied to many. But I do deeply regret believing that letting my children manage all my finances was my only or even best option. It seemed like the kindest, safest choice at the time, offering me comfort and relief. But what I found instead was a slow, quiet erosion of my independence, my privacy, my sense of purpose, and even my voice. It wasn't that David and Sarah meant ill. They truly believed they were doing what was best. Yet, good intentions don't always prevent unintended consequences. If I could do it over, I would have fought harder to stay in control of my own money, explored more ways to get help without giving up my power. Don't regret the years you've lived, but regret giving away the power that makes those years truly yours. Your financial independence isn't just about numbers in a bank account. It's about your dignity, your choices, and your very identity. It's worth holding on to for as long as you possibly can. If you're facing this decision, or perhaps you're already living with the consequences, I hope you take the time to ask yourself, is this truly what's best for me? Or is it just what seems easiest right now? Because the financial freedom you have today, your routines, your choices, your ability to decide how to spend your own hard-earned money is worth protecting. If you found these insights valuable, please comment below and share one thing you learned today, or perhaps your own experiences. Your thoughts are so important, and reading your comments gives me great encouragement. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I recommend you subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss any videos. Your support helps us continue creating good content to inform and inspire you. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.